Once again, Jesus went out beside the lake. A large crowd came to him, and he began to teach them. As he walked along, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," Jesus told him. And Levi got up and followed him. Hello again. I am Rick, the Divine Scribe. And today, we are closing out chapter 2, the Gospel of Mark, with verses 13 through 28. And as we move through these verses, I believe we will see one clear message unfolding. Jesus never lost sight of the people standing in front of him. The rules mattered. Tradition mattered. But people mattered too. And whenever religious traditions forgot the people they were supposed to serve, Jesus brought the focus back where it belonged. So let's begin with Levi. Levi gets up. Mark tells us that Levi was the son of Alphaeus. Most probably read that and move right along. I know I did. But it made me wonder, why did Mark mention the father of certain disciples? Levi was a common name. Calling him Levi, the son of Alphaeus, helped identify exactly which Levi Mark meant. It connected him to his family. We see something similar in other cultures. For example, Leif Erikson's name meant Leif, the son of Eric. His father was Eric the Red. So identifying someone through his father helped people understand who he was. But that's enough about Vikings. Let's return to Mark. Levi was sitting at a tax collector's booth. The tax collectors were deeply disliked. They collected money for the Roman government, and some made themselves wealthy by collecting more than the people actually owed. Because of that, many people saw tax collectors as dishonest, as traitors, and as spiritual outsiders. Levi was not the kind of person most religious leaders would have chosen for their inner circle. But Jesus walked up to him and said, "Follow me." And Levi got up and followed him. Mark does not tell us everything that Levi was thinking. He doesn't tell us whether Levi heard Jesus teach before, but he does tell us what Levi did. Jesus called and Levi responded. Now, traditionally, Levi had been identified with Matthew, the tax collector, named Matthew in the Gospel. Mark does not explain that connection here, but that has long been the traditional understanding. Jesus at Levi's table comes up next. The next scene takes place at dinner. Jesus and his disciples are eating at Levi's house, with many tax collectors and people Mark calls sinners. And Mark adds something important. Many of these people were following Jesus. Think about that picture as we do think in pictures. Jesus didn't merely speak to Levi at a distance. He sat at Levi's table. He ate with Levi's friends. He entered a room filled with people who were accustomed to being judged. I can almost imagine some of the other disciples looking around and thinking, who are these people? And how did we end up here? That's only my imagination. Mark doesn't tell us what the disciples thought, but we do know what the teachers of the law thought. They asked, why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners? And I love Jesus' answer. He said, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. Jesus was not saying that some people had no value, and he was not saying that he approved of everything everyone did. He was saying that the people who most needed help were the very people he had come to reach. You cannot heal someone while refusing to sit near them. Growing up, I remember going to Sunday school and feeling like I wasn't part of the clique. It felt different there, and I often felt the same way at school. It seemed like everyone belonged to some group, and if you weren't popular or didn't fit their expectations, you were left outside the group. Maybe you have felt that too. Maybe you have walked into a room and immediately knew that you didn't belong there, to the popular clique. But Jesus wasn't about cliques. You don't have to fit in a certain image before you could come to the table. Jesus met people where they were, and he invited them to follow him. Why weren't they fasting? The next question was about fasting. Mark tells us that John's disciples and the Pharisees were fasting. These were two distinct groups. John's disciples were the followers of John the Baptist. The Pharisees had their own religious practices. They may not have fasted for exactly the same reasons, but people noticed that both groups fasted, while Jesus' disciples did not. So they asked why. Jesus answered with a picture of a wedding celebration. He asked, how can the guests fast while the bridegroom is still with them? The time would come when the bridegroom would be taken away. Then they would fast. In other words, there's a time for mourning and there's a time for celebration. Jesus was with them. Something joyful was happening right then, and his disciples needed to recognize it. Jesus was not necessarily saying that fasting was wrong. He was saying that a spiritual practice should fit what God is doing in that moment. Then Jesus gave them two more pictures. No one sews a new piece of cloth into an old garment because the new patch can pull away and make the tear worse. And no one pours new wine into old wineskins. As new wine ferments, it expands. An old brittle wineskin can split open. Then both the wine and the skin are lost. New wine requires fresh wineskins. Jesus wasn't giving sewing advice. He wasn't teaching them how to make wine. He was telling them that something new was happening through him. They could not simply squeeze Jesus into an old expectation and assume nothing had changed. Have you ever heard someone say, Jesus didn't come to start a new religion. He came to change hearts. Sometimes we try to fit Jesus into everything. We have always been taught, but Jesus invites us to allow transformation from the inside out. The new life he was bringing could not be contained by fear, legalism, or empty ritual. A gift becomes a burden. Then Mark brings us to the Sabbath. Jesus and his disciples were walking through the grain fields. As they walked, the disciples began to pick heads of grain. The law allowed travelers to pluck grain by hand from a neighbor's field. The disciples were not stealing the harvest. The Pharisees objected because this happened on the Sabbath. Over time, many detailed traditions had developed about what counted as work. Picking the grain could be classified as harvesting. Rubbing away the husk could be classified as preparing food. So once again, the Pharisees asked, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath? I don't know about you, but people need to eat no matter what day it is. And for many of us, Sunday dinner was the biggest meal of the entire week. It certainly was when I was growing up. And somebody had to do the work of preparing it. Now, the Jewish Sabbath was Saturday, not Sunday. Sunday became the traditional Christian day of worship. So I am not accusing anyone who cooked our Sunday dinners of breaking the Sabbath. But Jesus answered by reminding the Pharisees of something that happened during the life of David. David and his companions were hungry and in need. David entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is normally reserved for priests. Jesus' point was not that God's law didn't matter. His point was that religious regulations should not be used to ignore genuine human need. Compassion was not the enemy of God's law. Compassion helped reveal its true purpose. Then Jesus said, "The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath." That is beautifully said. The Sabbath was intended to be a gift, a time for rest, a time for renewal, a time to turn our attention toward God. It was not meant to become another weight people were afraid of carrying incorrectly. But the religious leaders had taken that gift and surrounded it with so many restrictions that people could become afraid of getting it wrong. Think about that. Does it sound familiar? I will let you come to your own conclusions. The Lord of the Sabbath. Then Jesus ended with an extraordinary statement. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. I can only imagine those words went through the Pharisees like a lightning bolt. Jesus was not merely debating one interpretation against another. He was claiming authority over the Sabbath itself. And once again, we see the conflict building. Jesus calls the persons other rejects. He shares a table with outsiders. He explains that celebration has its proper time. He announces that something new is happening, and he reminds everyone that the Sabbath was created to serve human well-being, not to crush it. Do you see the reoccurring theme? Jesus keeps bringing the focus back to people. He meets them where they are. He teaches them, he heals them, and he calls them. And he challenges traditions when those traditions have lost sight of their purpose. We have all been raised with traditions. Some of them are beautiful. Some give our lives meaning and stability. But would you agree that Jesus also came to show us a new way? A way that leads to transformation, compassion, and a deeper relationship with God. I would love to hear your thoughts, and as always, respectful disagreement is welcome here. If you like this content, please leave a like and subscribe. I am Rick, the Divine Scribe. The word is given. See you next time when we begin Mark chapter 3.